So welcome. My name is Matt Berbers. I'm part of the North Simcoe Soil and Crop, and I made the PowerPoint. So we're going to go through it.
And thank you for doing that a lot.
I want to give thanks to the sponsors for Georgian Region Soil and Crop, all the companies that have helped us stay as a club. So you can see here also to FS Partners and NK. They've graciously given us the land, the inputs. They planted it for us, seed, feed, and everything. So it was a lot of their work for getting this done. Also, there is another virtual crop walk coming on a Tuesday in September 14th, focusing on potato and rhubarb production. So that's kind of neat. Also, if you'd like to get into that, get a hold of Lori at Greg Services. And in lieu of the money that we would have spent if we did an in-person event, we're donating $100 to the North Simcoe 4-H Club. If you'd like to also donate to the 4-H Club for North Simcoe, please contact Lori Chalmers. Her information is there. And as you're reading that, I'll introduce our two hosts tonight. So Bev Agar, as an Elmville area beef and cash crop producer, she's the president of our North Simcoe Soil and Crop chapter, and also is the agriculture manager at RBC. Andy Van Niekerk is a Stainer hog and cash crop producer. He is the SCIA regional director for Georgian area, and he's also a pioneer crop sales rep. Both are University of Guelph grads. In the pits today, you'll see Alex Berry. He's a soil management engineer from OMAFRA. Alongside of Alex, there'll be Daniel Surrett, an OMAP land resource specialist for Ontario. So we'll move ahead. Why we did it. So I personally want to do a root pit. I talked with Andy about this last year, and he had suggested doing a couple different options. I wanted to do one with a strip till versus deep ripping, and we were looking for a compacted area. I didn't really want to be digging in my own field, so it came up this location. I asked the co-op if we could, or sorry, not the co-op, FS Partners, if we could try doing this there, and they were on board. So we did 6 different trials, or sorry, 6 different treatments, and we'll go through them. Yeah, this. What you will see in this site, it's a corn bean rotation with the odd year of wheat. It was not even planted in 2020 because it was such a hard packed field. We did use an NK corn variety, shorter heat unit. It was planted on May 25th, so not super late, but getting there. And fertility was all the same. Besides in the strip till, there was a stripped band put in the fall. So what we will see is we planted green into approximately 3-foot standing rye.
That's pit 1.
That is pit 1, yeah. Pit 2 will be no-till, and 2020 was fallow ground. 18-inch deep ripping on site 3, 30-inch centers, 8-inch shank in the fall was a stripped on pit 4. Sorry, was a shank strip till, and that one we placed fertilizer in it. And pit 5, we just did a spring pass, so essentially a freshen. And then on pit 6 was just a single pass of a quality disc, which is basically a 1-pass disc unit.
Welcome everybody. So this is our first pit for today. I'm Alex Berry. I'm the soil management engineer for the province of Ontario. And this is my colleague Dan.
I'm a soil scientist or land resource specialist with the Ministry of Agriculture in Guelph as well. So I'm going to just start this first video off by talking a little bit about the soil profile, and I'll probably cut it off because I can talk a long time about a soil profile. But we were able to pull off a nice big chunk of the soil pit face here to expose some of the soil horizons. So first off, we're in basically a lake bottom, an ancient lake bottom. So it's fairly level topography here, and clay deposits mostly at the surface that would have been laid down when we were under probably hundreds of feet of water here about 10,000 years ago. So just to point out the soil profile, so as we know, the soil profile develops in horizons. The first surface horizon is typically you can tell because it's rich in organic matter. And so you can really see that line kind of across here. It's about 30 centimeters thick or so, maybe a bit less here, of rich organic matter in the surface layer. We would call that an AP horizon. You can see this brownish layer that's down here, and it might be hard to see from the camera, but again, so this soil has some bright orange mottles in it, and it's pretty brownish gray in color. So this would be a B horizon. We would call this a BG horizon, and the G stands for glaying, which is this gray color, and then these prominent mottles as well as part of that process. And all that color means is that this soil profile is holding on to a lot of water for a prolonged period of time during the year. When we get down here, we get into a transition horizon. That would probably be your first C horizon, which is your parent material. So the C horizon is the parent material. And then down at the bottom here, you might not be able to see it because it's pretty fine, but these are what we would call varved clays, varved silt. So you can kind of see the layering. So that was sitting like this in the soil profile. You can see how nice and flat that is. So these layers are all deposited slowly in water. And the other thing that's interesting about the parent materials in Ontario, most of them are developed from limestone. And so we use hydrochloric acid, and it reacts with free carbonates. And so you'll just see some fizzing. So that's how we know kind of where, that's about how deep soil has developed in Ontario when you find the fizzing in the material down at depth. So in this case, you know, somewhere around 75, 80 centimeters. And so this soil is known as the Atherley clay. And you can find it here, and you can also find it all the way on to Prince Edward County.
Wow.
So there you go.
So I should mention a bit about the plot. This is our first treatment here. So this was a broadcast rye, radish, and crimson clover in the fall last year, and then no-tilled into corn, obviously this spring. And what we're seeing here is good root structure, lots of fibrous roots in the profile, and fairly good structure. What we'll see and a worm. There's our first worm for the day. Basically what we're seeing here, and spoiler alert for the next pits, is very compacted, very massive structure. So this field has a history of somewhat tillage, maybe some no-till over the last 4 years. It's hard to get a good story even out of the two people that are here who apparently know everything about the site. But generally what we do know is this site is compacted and poorly. Not compacted poorly, but poorly, you know what I mean. So we are seeing we basically took the top of this field, the first 4 inches all over the field, made it one big patio slab. Because you can just peel off layers of compacted topsoil, and as we go look at more of the treatments with fewer roots in it, you get big blocky structures in the profile. So the benefit of having all these fibrous roots growing last fall and then the corn into the spring is we've got some real good fibrous material that's breaking up some of this big packed structure. So you can see some of these roots, and everywhere I kind of peel at it, you get a root in a crack, but in small cracks. So we'll move on to the rest of the pits, and we'll sort of compare and contrast, I guess, to what we see in each one.
Yeah.
All right, thumbs up is good. Okay, we're gonna keep going. Pit 1 here, we just watched it behind us. And we'll go through quickly and touch on it. So planted May 25th, we struggled to hit depth. We're only about 1 inch deep in the rye. It was quite dry, hard conditions. The rye, I figured the roots stole a lot of moisture, just in a certain instance. Anyhow, Andy, you've had some experience in green. Can you give us a quick overview where you've seen success?
Yeah, so one of the things that strikes me right off the get-go is planting depth there. When you're planting into a planting green situation, you need to overcultivate for depth to take into consideration if your slot doesn't close, then your seed is deep enough that it doesn't have the same effect of drying out your seed. The other thing you have to remember is your gauge wheel is riding on a 1/2 inch of residue. So that's the other thing you have to compensate for. Planter setup is so important when you're planting green like that. I think it's just as easy to cut through a crispy green root than it is to cut through a soggy dead root, in my opinion. So those are the two things that stuck in my mind. Some people suggest that planting into rye, there's some nitrogen compensation that has to happen. I think the jury's still out on that one, but those are two things that come to my mind, Matt.
I think, Andy, in this plot, though, we really did see evidence of that. We couldn't really necessarily tell from the video, but there were 2 rows that had poorer germination in that plot as compared to 2 rows we were in front of that had excellent germination, and were just much hardier plants.
My guess it was planting depth issue, because we didn't see the same effect in the next plot, which is straight no-till, which then your gauge wheels are riding right on the soil, not with a 1/2 inch of residue that was on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in that horizon, or in that plot, we certainly did see lots of roots, both from the wheat or the rye that had died, as well as from the corn going down into the profile, as opposed to in later pits, we're going to see it all at the
Yeah, no question.
Okay, we're going to move on to pit number 2.
Okay, so here we are in pit number 2. This is the no-till, no ground cover. So this was like the bare minimum amount of effort to put corn into ground, because you did nothing to it and it still grew. But what do we see in here, Dan? Like, this is, compared to and spoil alert for the rest of the site, we're not going to see this across the remainder of the locations, are we? This nice sort of, blocky structure in the topsoil.
No, not at all. So we can see a couple of inches at the top here of some more platey structure. You can see how that that's kind of breaking off into these really thin plates. It's a couple of inches, and then you get into this pretty nice structured soil, and you can see the roots kind of throughout that entire soil mass, but you can see that nice blocky structure of the topsoil, and certainly not something we're going to see at some of the other sites further on or later in the video, I guess.
And this was again, spoiler alert, this is our winning corn stalk for as far as depth of root that I found. I started tracing a big tap root down through here, and I kind of gave up, and actually it didn't go very far at all. But we can see a root that's made it, 50 centimeters, 60 centimeters into the soil profile. So that was on the hunt for some moisture, and it definitely found some down here. But like I said, decent structure, lots of roots, good organic matter, and then even down into the subsoil layer, getting a little bit more organic matter. That's not no-till doing that in 1 year, but that's maybe we haven't interfered with that root mass in some of the tillage plots we're going to see. But again, really interesting to see that this sort of much more loose structure between the rows than in the next couple of pits.
So it's across the entire soil pit, not just in zones like we've seen, or like we'll see at some of the other pits. So this structure is kind of consistent across the entire thing, and just for a means of comparison, we can see again it's the same clayey material with the bright orange mottles in it, and so impeded drainage again in this soil especially once you get into that subsoil. So that's holding on to a lot of water, and it's not going to let water through very easily. But you can see the roots are making it through, and the water makes its way down those root channels as well, right? So
yeah.
Do we have a plant?
Yeah, that's where I was going. So I tried to pull one of these straight up out of the ground, old leg arms here. He yanked that one out, but he cheated and he pulled it out sideways. Yeah. So. But like this root structure is very much, incorporated into the ground structure, so it's meandering through those small breaks and those blocks of soil, whereas we'll see at the next one the roots just went down the big channels, so it just pulled right out comparatively. Yeah. But
and then you can see how when the aggregates are smaller, how the roots are able to penetrate through the aggregates as well. You can see the roots going through, and they're really holding on to the sides of the aggregates. And what we'll see later on is in those larger cracks, the roots kind of don't really hold on to anything. They're going down those cracks, but then when you pull the plant up, they just come straight up, and they don't have any soil attached to them like this.
So, and if you're going to split hairs, probably better nutrient uptake in something like this. You're going to have more soil to root contact. So that's just more, you got more locations to do business, you can do more business. Whereas in some of the structures, if it's just going down a crack in the soil, it's only got a very limited amount of nutrients to pull through, and it's got to work a little bit harder. So we're not really seeing a noticeable distance in the stands of corn as far as, what you could explain by, nutrient uptake or whatever. But it's been a fairly normal year, I guess, as far as crop. But if we got into some tougher conditions, I would expect to see a little more variety across these stands of corn.
Okay, this was the no-till plot. Bev, will go to you first on this. This plot did show that did show to have the best structure, which the no-till guys don't here. But was this mostly due to it being no-till, or just possibly the spot in the field that we hit that maybe didn't have as much traffic?
Well, it's always really hard to tell that. Certainly this field was incredibly compacted throughout. The thing that I did notice that as your young lad who was doing the digging for us he dropped the topsoil in one spot and the subsoil in a second spot. And where he dropped that topsoil, it crumbled. We didn't see that in some of the other pits. So we certainly saw a better soil structure, something that was much more root friendly than we would have seen as we get into pits 4, 5, 6 kind of thing.
No question about that. The other thing I noticed, Bev, was there was way more worm middens in there, and there was just more worm presence. It was... Okay.
And Andy, I'm going to get you to explain what middens. He had to tell me what this term was earlier tonight.
Yeah, worm middens are basically the top part of a worm, and the worms will go up and gather residue and put it on top of their hole, and then you can see them. I don't know whether we could. I don't.
They're worm piles, is what they are.
Worm piles, yeah. They're just and you'll see a lot of worm poop in there too. So and that's what I'd like to see when I'm looking at soils. And I see way more of that in no-till, and particularly cover crop no-till soils. And so that's what I see a lot.
Well, and that's what we're looking for, is that healthy soil condition.
Yeah.
Oh, I did that. Well, I guess we'll move to pit 3 anyhow. I don't know how I seem to write on my screen, but we'll have to ignore that. All right, guys, we'll go into the chat like we did earlier, find the chat box, and we're going to go to pit number 3, the deep ripping pit.
Double click on that.
So pit 3, this was a deep rip in the fall, and then again, like we'll see in the next 2, the spring sort of freshened strip till, blades only. And what we're seeing really kind of agrees with that story. So Dan, wouldn't you agree there's a few more cracks in this soil than what we've seen across the site?
Yeah, you can certainly see them. They're much more obvious here. You can see the crack here coming all the way up. There's one over here coming right up into this row. So you can certainly see that the deep rip has broken up the soil, and you can see that this is kind of that deeper plow pan, somewhere around a foot down or 30 centimeters, and you can see that we've broken through that.
Really kind of loosened that up, right?
And we've loosened it up, but we still have these fairly massive, like you can see here, aggregates. This whole chunk wants to fall out. So it's still quite massive, except you've just got some more cracks in between them.
Bigger macropores, and that's kind of what we're seeing with the roots here. I pulled this one out, or I think Dan pulled this one out. And we've got some good tap roots coming, but I wouldn't say they were holding on to anything, because we probably pulled those out of cracks. So this one was pretty easy to pull out. compared to the no-till, which I couldn't pull out of the ground at all. So that's kind of what we're seeing. We just had a real long conversation that we probably won't put in this video about, you know, kind of the theory behind the tillage implement. But the deep rip, all it's done is it's lifted that profile and broke up the bigger aggregates, but it hasn't done anything on an individual aggregate level. I can find a good one here. There's a good one. You can see all the roots. If I was to break this apart, and when I break this apart, all you're going to see is, you know, roots. So it's the roots have done the tillage here instead of the sort of the mechanical tillage, which, you know, separated this chunk of soil from the rest of it, which got your roots down. So the corn looks pretty good. They tell me this was kind of the earliest corn to emerge. It looked like it was way ahead, and it probably was, because it had all these cracks that it could get down to moisture and get good roots established. But at the end of the day, did the deep ripping really achieve what you wanted to do from a compaction standpoint? And I don't know what you think, Dan, but
yeah, well, it hasn't.
That's a pretty.
Yeah, it hasn't done too much. The you know, the aggregates, these massive aggregates, are still pretty hard, and you can't really get through them. And what we were talking about before as well is that you've given yourself, you know, compared to some of the other sites we've looked at today, maybe an extra 5 inches of root growth within those cracks. So you've kind of elongated those cracks. You've gotten through a little bit of the plow pen that's down here, but that's about it. But again, you're still pulling out, you know, these massive chunks. And you know, this is just the plow pan sitting on top. So you can see that that's what the deep rip has done. It's basically broken this off on both sides, and that's kind of it.
So it's a tool in the toolbox for sure, the deep ripper. I don't want to sound like I'm, you know, against it. It's definitely helped this profile to kind of alleviate some of the sort of the massive chunk, but it hasn't gone, you know, the next step to get real good soil health between the rows. It has made some small, just by virtue of the shank running through there, it has made some better aggregate or some smaller aggregates. So that's kind of what we're seeing here, you know, nice and small and broke up. Some of that's the roots doing some tillage for us, but, you know, jam my knife into that, it's they're a little bit bigger. That one's actually not too bad because we got some weed cover crop going, but it's still pretty solid in there. So.
And then again, you know, just to highlight that the soil is very uniform across the site, so they're really comparable soil pits. We get into that same underlying clay that's really mottled. This one's really, really nice and bright. And so again, clays, silty clays, holding a lot of water for a long part of the year. And again, the site's is not tiled, right? And so we at least don't think it's been tiled. And so it takes a while for the water to come out of this soil in the spring. So.
Okay, we're back on pit number 3 for some commentary. I do have 2 quick videos of the deep ripper running, so I'm going to play them now. And one thing I found pretty neat about them is just how it does lift it. If you pay attention, you see it even between the shanks, it does fracture and lift. I haven't seen it dug down. It does still leave it in quite big chunks, but I thought it was neat to play these, and it's a bit longer one. This was last fall in 2020. Yeah, gonna watch here, you'll see the tractor is struggling to get down to full depth as it comes up. Ah, bugger.
Yeah, you can see the slippage, tire slippage on there.
Yeah, but you can see the lifting action between the shanks as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought those are some pretty neat things on this one. I've seen the Omafra guys were not as impressed as I thought they would have been with the ripper. Andy, is the ripper still a good tool to help start fight compaction?
Well, it really depends on your time frame, Matt, because my go-to solution for taking compaction out is probably leaving planting it into alfalfa for 3 or 4 or 5 years just to get those big tap roots down there. Let the roots do the work. However, if you need to get it done right away, you can. There is room for a deep ripper, but it's to reset the soil is what they call it. They reset the soil, and then but if you go back to regular tillage after that, you're just going to get into the same situation again and again. So you're best off reset the soil, plant it into cover crops, and continue with the no-till situation. So those fissures and the cracks in the soil will be replaced by roots, and they will stay there permanently if you don't till it again. So.
One of the things I had wondered about is, although in the little videos that you showed, Matt, it didn't look like it was terrible weather conditions or too wet. I wonder if it had been that little bit more dry, if we would have seen more cracking as opposed to just the lift and drop.
Yeah, and you're right on, Bev. I think I think I prefer to see that in the dry August is what I would prefer.
And possibly comment on the dangers or the negatives of going too wet, smearing action.
Yeah,
Quite possibly, yes.
Okay, so we're gonna move to, again, we'll move to pit number 4. So strip till the shanks. This is gonna be a fall shank pass with, there's a strip of fertility that went down between 6 and 8 inches behind the shank. So go to pit number 4 on the chat YouTube options.
So here we are in pit number 4. This is the fall strip till, and in that fall pass there was a shank that went through here and put some fertilizer on. And then again in the springtime, similar to what we're going to see in the next pass and what we saw in the previous pass, it had that spring blade pass. So we'll see some of that too. But definitely you can kind of see the effect of the shank on here. It is a little bit. There is some more cracks right in that pass. I was trying to dig it up over here. There is some definite, the aggregates are a little bit looser right in that pass compared to, something out in the middle. They're a little bit more stuck together, or a little more massive than what we were seeing in the other ones. But again, we got this platey structure on top. We have this sort of tillage shelf, I guess, at that kind of the 2-inch working depth. Yep. And then again, we've got that sort of historical plow pan, hard transitional interface there between the 2 layers of soil. But similar story to what we've kind of observed sort of throughout the day. Just looking at each pit earlier, same idea. Some roots down deep. We've got some, decent vertical roots here. This corn stalk was a little easier to pull out of the ground than some of the previous ones, but not too bad. Lots of roots. Again, a pretty okay stand of corn considering the compaction conditions we're in, and that could be seasonally driven too. So. But definitely there is a lack of good vertical structure, I would say.
Yeah, we're getting a good mixture of kind of aggregate sizes, right? From something kind of like this, which is, kind of intermediate, I suppose, as we'll see from across the different sites today. But then you're also getting, some stuff that's a little bit smaller and more manageable. Like this, right? That's directly under the roots.
And that might be because of that shank pass too. So there's one that would have been between the rows. Yep. There's a big crack there that's kind of developed, but underneath the roots, if I'd poke at it with my knife maybe, lot smaller structure. Some of that might be the fact that the corn root has done a little bit of tillage, but it's definitely, I think the strip tiller has definitely broke up some of this nonsense.
Yeah, and again, like we've seen, or we'll see at pretty much all the sites today, below the topsoil you get into this grayer layer, and in this one in particular, it's pretty heavy, but we can see the really bright orange mottles that are forming in the soil as a result of poor drainage. And so again, a soil that that can get compacted pretty easily if it's worked when it's really wet. And so you can see the gray colors with the models, really a good indication that there's water saturation in this soil for a prolonged period.
So not really a soil profile that you could just wait 3 or 4 days and be out of the woods from a compaction standpoint. It's a really got to take drainage a little more seriously than just time, I guess. So I don't believe this field is tile drained. I'm looking off to people on the wings.
Can't say for sure.
We dug all of these kind of randomly and we didn't hit a tile, so whatever that tells you. But yeah, so getting that profile dried out is going to be a definite challenge in a site like this, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, certainly, yeah. And you can see the natural cracking in the clays here starting to show up as the kind of face of the profile dries up. So again, when the roots can, they'll take advantage of those existing channels to get down deeper into the soil profile. And you can see again over here that plow pan layer near the surface, 4 inches down or so. And it runs all the way across the entire soil profile. So it's pretty consistent, except it gets broken up again where the tillage occurred. So
you can see it, especially sort of between the rows outside of the strip till. Definitely the roots are taking the more advantageous horizontal route than the vertical through the soil profile. So over here where we didn't get that worked area from the strip tiller in the fall, definitely a little harder to get a root down through that layer of soil.
Okay, welcome back from pit number 4, the strip till. Yeah, with the shank. So on this picture, you can actually see roughly what we use. So a shank that deposits the fertilizer in behind. And on this one, the roots looked good in the zone, but did not go much deeper. The lower root mass could be due to the lower fertility band. Bev, what did you take away from this treatment?
Okay, well, one of my concerns with the 2-pass treatment in this particular instance is that, and we'll look at it again in the next slide as well, is that we've made 2 passes over this field. Are we getting significant additional root growth to justify the extra diesel costs involved in doing that second tillage pass? There were more cracks, there were slightly more roots than we're going to see in the further ones. But again, a lot of roots that we're using the easy way, the horizontal way, as opposed to going down. And in honesty, when this was planted, it was planted into very dry conditions. If roots were going to go down, it would have been the year that they would have tried to go down. These ones, as soon as we got the moisture, just went happily sideways.
Andy, your thoughts?
One of the things that I think there's a place for strip till. I think it's a training ground for no-till situations, in my opinion. Sometimes it's a mental thing. People have to till, which I used to till, and I get that. But one of the things I would caution you on with strip till is don't use a shank in the springtime, particularly on clay soils, because you'll bring up cold marbles is what you'll do. If you need to warm it up, strip in the springtime, use a triple coulter system that just tills the top 2 or 3 inches of that strip. So that's what I would caution you on in terms of strip tilling.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the 5th pit. So pit number 5 in your chat box, click on the YouTube link and we'll see you back here in a couple minutes.
Okay, so welcome to pit number 5. So this pit is the spring strip till with the just the blades only, and we're working this strip about 4 inches deep, and that's kind of showing in the roots. I mean, having described that, I wouldn't be able to go in here blind and just figure out what that that's exactly what happened. But what we are seeing, bigger, nice big root ball, but the roots are quite vertical, but then we're seeing this this secondary pan, eh, Dan?
Yeah, there's 2, and you can see them really well right here. So there's the secondary pan here, and then there's the upper pan right there, and so.
And this was, so the history of this site, I guess, is a little bit varied in whether it was tilled or not, and fallow or or whatever, but some tillage, some no tillage, and this would be kind of the averaged work to depth, I guess. So that's why we're seeing that real big structure, and this would be, you know, from years way back, probably.
More of a historical plow layer.
And then anything with anything interesting going on in the lower depths, or same story?
Yeah, it's the same story. So the soil's pretty uniform across the site, but we certainly see some nice modeling, some bright model colors in there, and they get brighter and brighter as we get deeper into the soil profile. So again, showing that this soil holds on to water for a considerable part of the year, and likely that contributes to some of the issues with compaction because the soil is often wet when it's worked.
Definitely a nice wet sand is going to be easy to compact, and that's one thing about this site is it's had a lot of traffic on it. So normally in a field where you would get, you know, routine tram lines, you can kind of pick out a compacted layer, but this, safe to say, this field is pretty uniformly compacted.
Yeah.
From what we've dug out. Like, look at the size of these.
You can look at the
aggregates.
size of these, yeah, if you want to call them aggregates, and so that have been kind of pulled up by the bucket to dig the soil pit. So they're fairly large, and what you can see is where these claws are kind of breaking in the cracks. You can see here that there's some nice roots going down, and so they're going to basically follow those cracks to get down deeper into the soil because they can't get through the actual mass of this clod.
And this second shelf is going to act as kind of an impediment to water movement through the soil. So, and maybe that's why some of these roots kind of give up here, but the corn still looks half decent compared to the rest of the field. So it might be able to find enough water laying on top of this pan to satisfy its growth stage, especially in this season. If we were in a little bit of tougher conditions, maybe you wouldn't see such a good stand of corn. But
yeah, then we can still see the odd root kind of down lower in the profile, kind of poking through. So some of the roots have fallen. You can see this one is following probably an old either a worm channel,
like a worm channel
or
to me.
yeah, that's gone down. You can see the dark topsoil that's fallen into that channel, and so that's the only way they're going to get through the material.
And this corn stalk was a little bit easier to pull out than ones we've seen in previous. So the root structure is there, but it hasn't really adhered itself to the ground, I guess.
Yeah, and we should point out too, the topsoil depth here is probably about 30 centimeters, and it's pretty consistent across the field. But you can see that right at that 30 centimeter mark is where you're getting that second plow pan layer that we're having.
Right where maybe the subsoil was compacted a little bit more than the topsoil itself.
Yeah,
probably a change in organic matter. And then you would point it out, the real platy structure of this topsoil, just the really fine layers.
Yeah, and that's certainly evidence of compaction as well, right near the surface. And so you've got these really thin platy structures that are showing up, and you can kind of break this into these really thin layers. And so that's another sign that there's some compaction issues at the surface as well here.
All right, very good.
All right, welcome back from the spring strip till video. Jump into it. So that's a quick picture of what we used. Just 4 blades instead of a shank. And this one did show us it was a good root ball, but it was a shallow root system. Strip freshening is good for speed and to disturb as least amount of soil while preparing a seed bed and warming the soil. Andy, what are your thoughts on this pit?
I think it's a way to warm the soil zone in the springtime, depending on the conditions. So I think there could be a place for it, I think. But you're right, it's speed. And, if you warm it up a couple of days before, I think you get into a little better root soil, seed to soil contact. So.
Okay, it's certainly in that pit, we could very much see the historic things that had happened. You could see that strip tillage, that 2 inches of flaky on the top. You could see the 6-inch pan where the farmer had historically moldboard plowed. And below that was your a minor B level, but very much into parent material and lack of organic matter at depth. And so anything that we can do to benefit that
It's a win.
Is a win.
It's a win, for sure.
All right, we're going to slip into pit number 6. This will be our last pit, and this is a vertical tillage pit. So
Okay, so welcome to pit number 6. This was the vertical tillage pit. And basically what we're seeing here is exactly that. So we've got, 2-3 inches of vertical tillage over this pass. And that's what we're seeing here, right, Dan? We got this kind of this shelf here.
Yeah, you got the nice shelf all the way across the pit.
And look at our roots. They haven't even tried to get into the ground. So what are we seeing deeper in this profile?
Well, you can see here the topsoil ending somewhere here about 30 centimeters, so about a foot thick. And then we get into this this grayer or browner color, and you can see some pretty bright mottles in there, which are showing us that there's poor drainage in this soil, which is not surprising given the high clay content of these soils.
So as far as the effectiveness of the vertical tillage, the stand of corn isn't terrible. Like I said, I ran across here and tried to pull a corn stalk out, and these ones are pretty easy to pull out. I think that's right behind you, just the one laying on the ground there.
Right here.
So, I mean, that was about 50 pounds. Hey, we got a worm for free. That was about, what, 50 or 60 pounds to pull that out of the ground. And that's the extent of the root structure in this pit. So, there you go.
And you can see as well, from standing behind us here, you can see some fairly oversized aggregate. So you can see that we've got some compaction issues here in the topsoil. And so you can see this guy here. It's pretty massive, and you drop this on the ground and it won't even break open.
Look at the roots. Like, this would have been kind of on a natural crack, right? How that sort of aggregate came out. So the roots were definitely following these cracks down through that structure. So very interesting to see. But this is exactly how the excavator pulled that out of the ground. So it's pretty massive.
Yeah, and it's pretty consistent across the entire soil pit, which is what we would expect.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any real variation and stuff. We got some deeper roots, but I didn't chase this one all the way to the ground, or all the way down to the end. But it's really just finding those macropores. It hasn't really got a very defined structure to the root system.
Yeah, we can see a few kind of, in some areas, like I said, down in the cracks where the roots are penetrating deeper. But for the most part, they're like they are up here. They're hitting that plow pan or that tabletop, and they're just kind of going horizontal from there.
Okay, we're back from pit 6. That was the last one on our little trip. It's just kind of a picture of the one pass unit. It was a Kneverland polydisc. So this one did have a noticeable plow pan, or noticeable 2 or 3 inch pan. This machine is excellent for mixing materials such as manure, but be cautious. You do have compaction issues or too wet potentially. Andy, can you give us any observation on the tillage pass?
Yeah, I actually have a lot of mixed feelings about this type of tillage pass. I realize that it does a great job of getting the residue in certain length, but what I'm afraid of with this type of system is the incidence for the seed drill to pinch the residue pinching with the seed. So that would be my concern about that.
Just because it doesn't mix it deep enough, you mean? Or?
Well, you've got all that residue in that top 2.5 inches, and unless it's really dry, your residue is going to bend, not cut. So that's what my concern is about that type. When I had the opportunity to travel to Brazil, and we had the same discussion with some of the farmers there, and they had really, really strong, intense rain events. And he said, and their ground is sloping. And he said one day, after 3 inches of rain in an hour, he said the whole topsoil just kind of picked up and moved down. So that is another concern about that type of tillage system. So that's my concerns.
Yeah, well, we certainly didn't see that on this site because we have such a flat site.
Absolutely.
I know earlier in the videos, they had referred to this as being a poorly drained soil. And yet, as a soil scientist, I would refer to it more as an imperfectly drained soil. You saw the glide colors in the subsoils, those grays, but you also saw an awful lot of soil mottles, and mottles are those thin orange lines. Hopefully they're relatively thin, because again, those are the pores where you've had roots and or worms go down. And when you have drying out events, then the iron in those areas gets a chance to oxidize, and that's why they're orange. So I would consider that more of an imperfectly drained soil naturally than a poorly drained soil. But again, in both those imperfectly and poorly drained soils, you need to seriously consider what type of tillage you're doing and the timing of that tillage.
Exactly. Timing makes a big difference, for sure.
Okay, we're gonna close the Bell's PowerPoint. So I'm gonna unshare it. Well, I guess we're gonna go into questions. Just before questions, I'll pick their brain on what tillage plot one. So I'm gonna come out of. Okay, everybody. If you want to, you can go back to, in the top right corner, there's an option to go to speaker or gallery view. Go in gallery, you can see everybody's face.
As long as they've chosen to put their face up.
Yeah.
Okay. I see some happy smiling faces. That's always a lovely thing to see at this point in the night. Okay. So which of these did we find most interesting? In honesty, I found that the deep tillage one interesting because I like you, Matt, I think I had anticipated that we would see more breakage in between the rows, and yet we didn't see as much. We saw the video where it lifted and it dropped, but it didn't necessarily shatter. I wonder if that was, we've talked about the fact that maybe it was a little bit moist when it was done. The other thing that happened last winter is that it wasn't as harsh a winter as many that we've had. So we didn't potentially have as much frost action as we would have in other years.
Andy, what one most interested?
So what struck me was the planting green. I mean, I'm a big fan of planting green and no tillage systems. I personally don't think you can have a no tillage system without cover crops. I think they have to go hand in hand, just because it helps with rills erosion. You'll still get erosion with no-till situations, but the cover crops will help create that soil armor that will help protect the soil from erosion. No-till green cover crops are a long game. I think in this particular case, I think probably the 8-inch deep till with the P&K will probably win the plot, but that's always a short-term situation. I think no-till and cover crops are a long-term. In the long term, your soils with better soil health will always win and always give you better yields.
And even
at
at our age, Andy, we're in it for the long term.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, Matt, you're in it for the even longer term. What did you think won the plot?
I own the strip tiller, so I think that one's the coolest one. But no, I am trying more for the plant green stuff, and besides the fact that there was a lower population count, I really I've tried some of that this year. Mine failed too. But there's a lot of neat, you can really tell when you dig into the soil. So that's something I'm going to play with more. But
planter setup is so important in that regard.
Yes, and I learned that the hard way. So that is our run through. We have reached our hour and a little bit, well, almost our full presentation. So I think we are going to quit recording. We're going to go into the question phase. So if you do feel like heading out, you're welcome to, but we're going to open the floor up to questions. So either you can put your questions in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask Andy and Bev anything you want.
And Matt.
And Matt.